Welcome to the Three Thought Podcast. And today is also a special, we're going to deliver a special episode because, again, 2 times in a row now, we have a professor from the American Studies at SDU. And this time it's kind of an expert in cowboy-related themes. And that ties perfectly into the whole thing about the Red Dead Redemption 2 hype, which I'm sure a lot of gamers have bought. So, and he has also written a book, Thomas Bjerre, about cowboys, which is called The Cowboy Nation, or in Danish, Cowboy Nation. So, first and foremost, welcome to you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Glad to have you on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
So, you bought the game as well.
I did. Yeah, I did.
How do you enjoy it?
I liked it. I'm not a huge gamer. I played the old Red Dead Revolver.
Oh, that's old school.
That's old school. Yeah, I played that. And I haven't played Red Dead Redemption 1 for some reason. I guess kids got in the way. But I wanted to try this one. And I'm only, 25% into it. So I haven't finished it. But I really enjoyed it. Extremely realistic in its sort of visually, of course. And some interesting storyline.
Yeah.
And as someone who's watched a lot of westerns, it sort of felt like being in a lot of those films. I mean, some of the shots are taken directly from Western films, so there are a lot of sort of homage paid throughout the game.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's why we have you on this podcast, because we wouldn't tell.
Yeah. No, but, so without having finished the game so far, it's been fun.
Just to be more precise, without giving any major spoilers, how far are you in based on the storyline? Do you remember what's the last kind of mission or something, just to know where you are?
Well, I think the gang just moved into this house, so...
Okay.
Yeah. After the camp by the lake.
Saint-Denis area.
Yeah, that's... more and more missions are in...
The old Confederate mansion.
Yeah.
Sharabella or something.
Yeah. Shady Bell.
Shady Bell.
Shady Bell.
And to all the listeners out there, we're going to try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, because I haven't played the game either.
So,
no spoilers.
Well, not major spoilers, but we're going to talk a little bit about the theme, because it's very interesting when comparing it to the classic Western movies.
Yeah.
So,
and should we just say your background and why you decided to study this idea of the cowboy and the frontier, and just a brief history of Wanderer's life
of Thomas Bjerre.
The life of Thomas Bjerre.
Well, my initial background and what I wrote my MA thesis on was Southern literature, which was my interest during my MA years. And once I'd done that, I had, while reading some of these contemporary Southern novels, I had noticed that a lot of the plot lines in these male-driven novels by white male writers read like Westerns, basically. And so that's what I ended up writing my PhD on. Still contemporary Southern literature, but how some of these novels, instead of continuing the Southern tradition, drew on Western myths and Western themes and so on. And so that's when I really started diving into the sort of classic Western genre and watching a lot of these old classic Westerns as well as the newer ones. Yeah.
So that is because I know we're going to talk about it later on, this idea of the masculine American man, and how they sort of defined this character. We also talked it in just before we started recording that it was mainly Hollywood who started this character of the Western guy with what it was his name, John Wayne, I believe.
I mean, it was
the gunslinger and the
it was there in literature
man.
Way before Hollywood. But they certainly made it
mainstream,
visible in new ways, and perhaps also globalized it in a sense.
I think that's a good way to start. And where exactly did the Western idea start, and how is the Western real history compared to the cultural things we know today?
So when we say the West today or the Western, I mean, of course it's, although a lot of it is fiction.
Yeah.
Of course it's grounded in the historical context of westward expansion, right? And so the period after, this starts right after, even before the Revolution, right? But mostly it's the period after the Civil War. It's from around 1865 to 1900, more or less, or 1895 or whatever. Of course, we have westward expansion begins way before that, the Louisiana Purchase, right, 1803, where the country more than doubles in size, et cetera, et cetera. War against Mexico, and so on. And so, of course, people begin going west, and that frontier experience, or the frontier line, then becomes this thing that moves further westward. And so what drives the Western genre, be it in literature or film, is the clash between civilization and then the wilderness that's on the other side of the frontier line. And the wilderness can take many forms. It can be, nature itself, the weather, harsh weather conditions, be it, snow and cold, or the desert and heat and so on, winds. It can be wolves and other animals. It can be savages, as Native Americans were often called, and they were often seen and were also constructed in art as being part of this savage wilderness.
So it is this idea of man versus nature.
Yeah. Yeah, and the man versus nature or wilderness is a trope that, it's not uniquely American, but it finds a unique American tone already in the 1820s with James Fenimore Cooper's very famous and influential series of novels known as the Leatherstocking novels, 5 novels. The first comes out in 1823 and the last in 1841. And these novels introduce the character of Natty Bumppo, known also as Leatherstocking, Pathfinder, Hawkeye, a white man who grows up with Indians. And so he becomes the sort of the blueprint for what we know today as sort of the Hollywood classic Western hero. This man who is somehow can survive in the wilderness. He knows his way around. He can. He's a pathfinder. He knows the way of the Indian, which comes in handy when he has to defeat them. He's not. He can also survive in the civilized world, although he prefers not to be too much in that because it's not his ideal environment. And so these Leatherstocking novels become important in this in the kind of image that they push forward of this man with a foot in each camp, civilization and wilderness. In 1902, so we're jumping more than half a century now, but just to get us sort of moving towards the game, Owen Wister, a writer, publishes a novel called The Virginian, which I think very few people read today, but it becomes this blockbuster literary sensation at the time, and it sort of builds on Cooper's themes, but also it has some significant changes. So the hero, or the narrator, is this East Coaster weakling, if you will, who is sent out west to Wyoming, and already on the train, as he's departing the train, he sees this cowpoke, this cowboy, who remains unnamed in the novel. He is simply known as the Virginian. And immediately this narrator is sort of taken aback, and it's almost, we can talk about sort of homoerotic undertones already in the genre, because he's taken aback by this magnificent specimen of man. And so the novel, which was dedicated to Theodore Roosevelt, the macho president, a friend of Owen Wister, the novel can be read and could be read at the time as sort of a guidebook to how to regain manhood. Owen Wister along with Theodore Roosevelt, believed that at this point in time, so we're just at the beginning of the 20th century, that America had become complacent. It had lost its manly virtues, and at this point in time, the West has been won. If you want to stay in this sort of colonizing language, all the major wars and battles had been fought. The West had been settled, and immediately, and the Virginian is an example of this. A nostalgia sets in. In 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau had declared that the frontier was no longer existing, right, because the country had been settled. Frederick Jackson Turner, which you may remember from your history class, in 1893, gives his now famous Significance of the Frontier in American History talk, which is then published. And so that idea of the importance of what is now past, that frontier experience, the main idea that is what made America unique, becomes sort of the driving force behind the Western genre in Hollywood, and sort of also historians' way of thinking about the past, the American past. And not until basically the 1960s do we see historians begin to challenge the Turner thesis, right? So just to go back to the Virginian, it's sort of a nostalgic tribute to the cowboy and the ideals and values that he possessed, according to these writers and myth makers. He is Owen Wister treated him like a knight from Sir Walter Scott's books Ivanhoe and so on. So this knight planted on American soil. He was a gentleman. He rarely resorted to violence, which of course is a change from the type of Western hero we see in Red Dead Redemption 2. Violence was the last resort, and that sticks up until the 1960s, basically. But we can get into that because the success of The Virginian, which is published in 1902, is, of course, noticed among these people who work in this new genre called film, or new media called film, right? Which is brand new. And in 1903, Edwin S. Porter directs The Great Train Robbery, which is considered the first film with that has a narrative, that has a storyline, right? At this point, in 1903, people get excited about moving pictures. So just a 30-second clip of a guy riding a bicycle is in itself a sensation. So here we have, I think, a 10-minute film. It's out there on YouTube about a gang who robs a train and who are then hunted. It has a famous last scene where one of the bad guys, it's a close-up of him pointing his gun at the camera and shooting, which, according to some stories, people fled these Nickelodeon movie theaters because this was, breaking all kinds of new ground. And so that little film, The Great Train Robbery, became immensely popular. And so it was filmed on the East Coast in New Jersey, but we have, people with Stetson hats, and all these Western tropes were already there. So a lot of movie companies begin to churn out these films. In Germany, we have a lot of films being made that sort of mimic The Great Train Robbery. And so to beat the competition, some American movie companies travel west. They have to invent cameras that can shoot outdoors in the desert and so on. But they begin shooting a series of films in these uniquely American landscapes, right? The desert, we have mountains and so on. And they become even more popular. And so in 1909, the Bison Movie Company, note the name, by the way, Bison, they arrive in California, set up shop. That becomes the beginning of Hollywood, right? By 1910, the Western had become a recognizable film genre, perhaps the first actual genre. And from 1910 and for decades on, around 20 to 25% of all films coming out of Hollywood were Westerns.
I'm wondering, why do they call it spaghetti western? Because was that later?
Yeah, that's the 60s.
Yeah,
and that's another example of how the Western is a global genre. I mentioned Germany in the very beginning of the 20th century did a lot of Western films, and so there are a lot of big silent Western films that very few people know of today. But John Ford, as the director, did a lot of these. With sound film, I think the beginning of the modern Western is probably Stagecoach 1939, which is a big year in American film. We have Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and so on. But Stagecoach is the first film that John Ford directs with John Wayne as the star. He'd been struggling for a decade in Hollywood, John Wayne, in B films. That becomes his another chance at a starring role, and it takes off from there. And he becomes a global, or at least the biggest actor about 10 years later in Howard Hawks' Red River. So John Wayne becomes synonymous with the Western. And to begin with, the Western hero in Hollywood's Westerns is this knightly figure, the gentleman who resorts to violence only at the end and so on.
So that's where this lone hero comes from, where we know Western normally wants to this, rides to the sunset at the end of the movie.
Yeah, he does that in Stagecoach. Only at this point, there's often a romantic interest.
Yeah.
And so we see that also in High Noon, right? The Grace Kelly, who's the wife there. So they ride off, but often with a woman by their side. And you mentioned spaghetti westerns. We see in the interesting thing, and that's what we try to do in the book, Cowboy Nation. We try to show how the Western mirrors American society. So the changes throughout the 20th century can be traced in the Westerns. Of course, they all take place in the 1880s or 90s or whatnot, but they somehow comment on the time in which they're made. When we get to the 1960s, and there are beginning signs of this in the 50s, but American society, as we all know, undergoes tremendous change and disruption. The war in Vietnam, we have the civil rights movements that's been fighting since certainly the 50s. And so we should say now that the American Western, be it literature, but certainly the Hollywood version, is sort of a white man's playground, right? It's all about paying tribute to the importance of the white man in winning the West, right? So the kind of audience that really took in Westerns were also obviously white men and boys to begin with, but then the Western matured and also got an adult audience. But in the 60s, we have a new generation of Americans who are increasingly skeptic about authorities, be it whoever's in the White House or politicians or teachers, parents, and so on. The feminist movement is also gaining traction. We have the civil rights movement. So if you're a conservative white American in this era, you feel that the ground is sort of shifting or cracking beneath you. And if you look at the Westerns that come out in the 60s, the response is that so the women are sort of kicked out of the narrative. Women have never been really important. They've often served to kick off the narrative. The male hero has to save a woman, or something like that. But we begin to see this collection of this male collective in Westerns. So groups of men, be it the Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a movie like The Professionals or The Magnificent Seven. Groups of men. The women are pushed out. We see a few brown people who are let into this circle of men, never in major roles, and that, I think, and a cynicism that creeps in. And then in Italy and in Spain, things happen, and that's where we get to spaghetti westerns. They're actually, many of them are shot in Spain, but with Italian directors. So that's the name. And these are directors who've grown up watching Howard Hawks and John Ford westerns, and who love the genre, but who are of a new generation. And some of them are also inspired by other types of filmmaking that's not American. But they start doing these westerns shot in Europe, Spain or Italy, they bring in sometimes international actors. They're all dubbed at the end, so it doesn't matter if they spoke with accents or whatnot, because it would be dubbed. If you watch them today, they're still dubbed. I mean, it doesn't match.
Is it noticeable to see?
Yeah, oh yeah. And that's just part of it. You have to accept that. But Clint Eastwood, of course, is one of these actors who come in and stars as this character that's referred to as No Name in a series of westerns that are now classic.
But we also start to move from this, as you mentioned, white knight. As you said, the cowboy in the beginning was this sort of another way of thinking of this knight coming and saving the maiden in danger. But we start to move towards this more Clint Eastwood kind of cowboy, the silent guy who has no real. He's just a wanderer who ends up in these situations, deals with them, and just leaves almost without saying anything. He's this mysterious kind of guy who almost can kill you with a look.
Yeah.
So we start to move from this white knight cowboy towards this more cynical and mysterious
the
cowboy.
post-western.
Yeah, more post-western as seen before.
So one of the considered the great classics, top 5 certainly, is Shane, that comes out in the early 50s. And it's an interesting example of, it's still the shining knight who rides into this small town. They're being bullied by this cattle baron, and he refuses to take sides. He falls in love with the mother of this house that he stays in, but of course he can't act on it because he's a gentleman. The son takes to him. He takes on this father role because the father is often busy and so on. So again, the Western as a manual for manhood and so on. And it has this famous ending where he finally takes sides, of course, and ends up in this shootout, and he's wounded, and he rides off back into the mountains from where he came in his deerskin suit, and the boy running after him, Shane, come back, we need you, mother needs you, right? So there are all these unspoken things, but there's still an idealism to that. I think the spaghetti westerns, they bring a playfulness, but also a cynicism. They're not American. They don't have these American ideals or the sort of that mythic ideal that perhaps they feel they have to live up to. And of course, the global success of these spaghetti westerns, they catapult Clint Eastwood to global fame, and they inspire American filmmakers. And so we see this cynicism creeping in, where certainly in the late 60s. And Clint Eastwood, brings that with him to his American westerns also, where the lone hero is this embittered, broken man who that theme is also there throughout, but not as, I think, potent or as cynical. His expertise in killing people has somehow tainted him, and so although it's his job to civilize, it can be riding into a town with and sort of cleaning out the bad elements, the corrupt sheriff or whatnot, or whoever is threatening civilization. He cleans that out, but because he's already tainted, he can't just settle down. There's no room for him in civilized society, so he has to ride on right to the next town and problems. Exactly. That's the sort of the tragic element to the Western hero, and of course he never talks about it. It's inferred, and as an audience we can see it, and it gives him this aura of sort of a tragic epic hero, right? Yeah.
I'm also thinking, because you talked about earlier how the Western have sort of evolved, or in contemporary America at the time, it takes elements of how the society is changing. And if you look today, the new Western that's come out, like for example Django Unchained from Quentin Tarantino, it takes much more an African American approach, which has basically been neglected in the past. So you could also say that in contemporary America now, it also takes a different aspect of the Western, because it now focuses on more diversity in film.
This begins in the 60s also, where you have Westerns being made where the focus and the sympathy lies with the Indians. There are a few westerns being made back then with black protagonists, but not very few. But we see this beginning in the 80s and 90s. Mario Van Peebles makes an old black western called Posse in the early 90s. Not a very good film, but of course, it's impossible the way society has progressed to make a traditional western today. People still try Kevin Costner and so on, but they so when they remade 3:10 to Yuma, which the new version came out with Russell Crowe and Christian Bale 10 years ago, they included a fairly long scene where you have the part of the railroad being constructed, and where we see how many of those people working hard and dying, winning the West, if you will, or certainly settling the West, were Chinese immigrants, Mexicans, and so on. So that aspect, just as historians began to focus on who else but white men had an actual role in the settling of the West. So when westerns are made today, that aspect is always included to some extent. And Tarantino he likes to play with genres, period, does. Right? And so how do you challenge the Western genre? Well, you place it in the South, and you put a black man in charge, right? And so I call it a Southern. I've written about that film in the context of the Western genre because it's as much about the South and the Southern tradition and so on as it is. But of course, it looks like a Western, right? And then he does The Hateful Eight, which, it also looks like a Western, but it takes place inside for like 2.5 of the 3 hours or whatever is in one room. Yeah, and the Western is all about the big outdoors, right?
As you're saying, Tarantino likes to play those genres. I always see his movies as both loving the genre as a love letter and at the same time satire of the entire genre, because he brings so many elements from all different kinds of genres into one genre.
It's a postmodern take, right?
And that's actually a pretty good segue, I think, to Red Dead Redemption, because that's also at the same time sort of a love letter to the Western, but it's also a huge satirical element of the Western genre.
Yeah, and you have to remember the developer of this game is the Rockstar, who are basically experts in satires of American culture and American society. So their take on the Red Dead Redemption 2 is very compelling and very interesting take on, because as you mentioned pre-production that you played Red Dead Revolver. And that game in many ways was kind of a classic Western, wasn't it?
Oh, it's been a while. I think so, but I would have to either go back and play or read up on it.
It is more focused on this more traditional aspect of the,
I think so.
From the shooter cowboy.
I mean, the protagonist. It's like his father is a cowboy. The protagonist when he was a kid, and his family gets killed, and then he wants revenge. And after he gets his revenge, he just silently moves back to the wilderness, doesn't accept the money. So he is
and every major boss is taken out with it's
and a shootout.
The high noon shootout trope.
Yeah, so already there we see this classic Western with the Red Dead Revolver game, and then we move into I think 2008 or 9 with the Red Dead Redemption 1.
I can't remember which year it came out.
It's 11. It's 11 with the PlayStation 3. And then we see how this classic Western is challenged by this post-Western view, where it's not all about the silent hero who gets this perfect ending. It's more he's a tragic hero. So
you could say that the interesting part from what we have talked about this evolution of the cowboy and the Western genre with the White Knight, and then it comes to this silent character, mysterious character who just sort of fade out again. Now we have come to this more tragic character of cowboys, where there is, without spoiling anything, no happy ending. There is this, like, the person doesn't belong in this world, and they know it, but they can't seem to just end it. They have to try at least. But there's no settling down. They try to be gentlemen, but they can't accept their position as gentlemen in this world. They have to be this monster that everyone, because they have moved towards becoming this monster that everyone fears, this gunslinger, this character who just comes in and shoots everybody and then leaves. And that is what I got from the Red Dead Redemption genre, that they sort of try to picture this character as best as they can without they sort of romanticize the character, but also with satire and typical cynical rock star elements and critique of the state of the American people and society. Just look at their GTA 5, the critique on consumer and individual freedoms and stuff. They also show this in the Red Dead Redemption 2, I believe.
Yeah, and of course they place it in 1899, which is significant because, as again, the West has been won, if you want to use that phrase, it's been settled, and Arthur Morgan and his gang belong to this. I mean, their time is over, right?
Yeah,
it's the Industrial Revolution is going on. You can see it when you reach the town of Saint Denis, which is sort of supposed to be New Orleans. So that's a way of encoding that sense of, well, it's both nostalgia, but it's also a sense of desperation for that type of life, which has been memorialized in a century of Western films and even before, so in stories, right? So I think there was sort of a doubleness to it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it in the sort of landscape of the Red Dead Redemption 2 map. The idea that you all of a sudden you find yourself on the prairie in the steppes, and all of a sudden there's an oil field and small towns being pops up everywhere, and people start saying, oh, you can't just shoot your way through this town, and lawmen are chasing you down if you come.
Pinkerton detectives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean it's they're being cornered from all sides, right, by civilization. So we're back to this notion of, and of course within the gang, there's also a hierarchy of being, civilized. And so they have the same hierarchy, I think, within the gang also. We start in the snow, which is
the mountains.
In the mountains,
coming out of the mountains.
Yeah, and of course the snow is not very common in westerns. This is sort of a tribute to an old spaghetti western called El Gran Silencio, about this mute western hero. It takes place in the snow. Tarantino, pays homage to that in The Hateful Eight.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Johnson, a 70s western starring Robert Redford, also takes place in the snow. So there are a few of those, but it's certainly a unique way to start a western game, right, where you're sort of trotting in snow. But it's also, I think, it plays with that notion of the virgin land. I mean, you can write your own destiny, right, directly on the land.
Yeah.
So again, all kinds of good stuff.
What struck you at first when you played the game, except for the realistic aspects of the game?
Well, I mean,
details.
I think this open world was just it seemed immense. I'm beginning to bump into boundaries now, but to begin with, and all the stuff you could do. I mean, you can opt out of all these missions and just go fishing or hunt bears or game, buffaloes, and so on. And then actually, after spending all these hours in various versions of wilderness, be it the snowy mountains or just grass and so on. The first time I ended up in Saint Denis by accident, that was sort of, whoa, this is civilization with you have lights and so on. That was actually, it felt real in a way, right? Sort of a shock almost, because you've sort of immersed yourself in this sort of prairie existence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of the most interesting takes I took on from the game was the way that they had this hyper-realistic approach to how the landscape is created, because you have just as you mentioned in the start of the game, you have the mountains, but you also have the swamp right beside Saint Denis, which is New Orleans,
Yeah.
which is a representation of New Orleans in the game. But if you go further down through Blackwater, then you go to New Austin, which is the desert where the classic movie takes place. So for me, I was kind of staggered by how much different these different landscapes in Red Dead Redemption was, and especially when you talked about how the westward expansion actually happened from a historical perspective, where you had these fur trappers and
I mean, we had this. Yeah, it starts with a few men who go into the wilderness to catch beaver and so on. Then you have, slowly families farming the land, cutting down trees and building these log cabins and so on. And then you get, of course, sort of increasing movement once you have the Transcontinental Railroad. That sort of settles it, right? The gold rush in California in 1848, also brings a lot of people out there. It's obviously these pioneers. They battled different landscapes depending on where they settled, and I haven't explored the entire world of the game yet, but and I haven't reached the desert yet, so I look forward to that.
Yeah, it takes a while, but
but it's also they mentioned before the game came out that the lower part near Blackwater is sort of it's taken from the first game.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's one huge map they just made even bigger.
Okay. All right.
But I would say that, but it's like the map sort of represents the southern part of America, crammed together with Saint Denis being in New Orleans, and you have the swamps of Louisiana, and as you move westward, you sort of have to the north you have the Rocky Mountains, and as you move south you have this sort of this desert, more I wouldn't say Texas, but more what is it called, Arizona maybe?
Yeah, New Mexico,
Arizona,
yeah.
Elements.
Yeah, because in the original Red Dead Redemption, it was you could go to Mexico
on the other side,
which was pretty interesting. Also because someone who played both Red Dead Redemption game, it was just brilliant nostalgia for me to ride through the deserts and actually noticing I've been here before.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing that I noticed, not right away, but as I progressed in the game, was sort of this. I have this interest in the southern decay of the southern state, and the mindset, the decay of the mindset of the southern state. And I remembered this not only in the swamps around Saint Denis, but I remembered as I progressed farther north. I will not spoil anything, but the people started becoming these hill people, and these tree people and the swamp people, and I found it fascinating that when you saw them, they were these hideous sister-filled people with skin tearing off and their teeth missing, and they were these stereotypes of what you imagine swamp people being like.
Yeah. Not only that,
and they had their own myths and legends, and these. I believe there is something called night people.
Yeah.
And these night people are basically a tribute to zombies, and they have these people coming and taking kids in the night, and I just found that very fascinating.
If you haven't gone into the bayou, you should go there at night, because it's really creepy. It's really creepy because they have these urban legends that are actually based on real legends from southern people, because I've seen the YouTube comments, and then the people from Louisiana will say, "Oh, I heard these creepy pastas when I was a kid," and that's really interesting. They took that element, so I really found it fascinating how they kind of combined it perfectly, the classic Western elements with the myths and legends, with this neo-Western realistic depiction of the real landscape, how they were able to combine it somehow, and was just a wonderful experience playing it, obviously. So, and one of the
Well, again, you mentioned the sort of the decay of the South and so on. I mean, one of the common distinctions between the South and the West and the myths belonging to each.
Yeah.
This is not my idea, but I was quoting it in class the other day that sort of in popular culture, the popular image of the South is the decaying plantation house, right? So the South has been still is synonymous with stasis, even sort of backward regression, decay, degeneracy, and so on. And the popular image of the West is this lone rider traversing the landscape. So that, notions of progress and looking towards the future and all that, right? So very distinct and different myths, but somehow they're both here in the game, right?
So one of the things that we would like to discuss is how the classic American dilemma plays out in Red Dead Redemption, because we know anyone who studied American studies know there's always conflicting narratives when it comes to different stories, and I think Red Dead Redemption actually makes a good depiction of how this dilemma, how complex it is, because we see how these people believe in equality, freedom for all men, but somehow it doesn't really. There are always some people who comes on short with that.
Other people's freedom gets in the way of your own freedom. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
it tends to happen.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, the Southern, because we actually see how, for example, the Confederates, they called the Lemoyne Raiders in the game, where they are basically gangs who are actually participated in the Civil War, where they were on the side of the Confederates, and they just can't let the past go.
Yeah,
where that was really intriguing for me, because we also have the character in the protagonist gang of cowboys named Lenny, who also explains his perspective. Where they had this wonderful conversation where where Arthur is talking about how slavery was for Lenny and his parents, and then he trying to explain to Arthur, because Arthur feels like his freedom is threatened by civilization, and then Lenny gives his perspective on what lack of freedom really means.
I think it's an interesting example of using gameplay as, in a way, history telling. I mean, giving different aspects of historical experience packed into this action game. Which of course is can't you opt out of these conversations?
Yeah,
sometimes
if they're cutscenes, you can sort of skip them.
That's true,
but
not all.
If you're transporting yourself from point A to B, and you have to ride, you have this conversation, and you just said, "Oh, okay, just gonna hear your background story and how you."
And I think that was also what struck me with this game. So if you compare it to GTA, which is a fast game, right? You grab a car and you take off, and here you're stuck on this damn wagon with a yapping person next to you, right? And I think there is to some extent, they stay loyal to that experience. And a lot of Westerns also, I think especially newer ones, if you watch Open Range by Kevin Costner, they spend a lot of time changing a wheel on a wagon, getting stuck in the mud. This is a way of sort of, I think, recognizing the hardships of just everyday life, not some legendary gang member or an outlaw or sheriff, but just regular people trying to make it. And I think the game has an element to that. Obviously, it's still narrative driven because they want people to stay on board, right? But I do think it tries to give some recognition to the fact that life was slower back then.
I also think we kind of made you satire of it, because I haven't played the game, but I know if you try to run away from somebody talking to you, he's just keeps going fast. And, hey, why are you running so fast? And just trying to. So it's basically making fun of you for trying to get away from his boring conversation.
one of the other elements is also how Native Americans are depicted in the game, because
I have yet to meet one, I think.
Yeah, you're gonna meet them.
There is actually one, but I read an article like 3 days ago, which I was just gonna elaborate on later. But Charles, one of the main characters in the community, is part Native American and part African American,
and he's a tracker, right?
So, he is. Right. He is this this born of nature guy who says you have to. He's this. I believe up in the mountains, one of the first missions, you have to respect nature and you have to kill the animal.
Yeah, that's true.
He's this.
Yeah, he takes you out bow hunting for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I read this article about, and I know it's on this. What can you call it? This social justice crusade site. I read this, but they sort of said that the black-faced the Native Americans by combining the two and sort of said, oh, you have this friend, so it's okay. You are a little tough on others, but I just found his background story so interesting because people can't relate. They can't seem to depict him as a Native American or African American, so that they don't know there's a mission further in the game where they can seem to place him. They don't see him as a person like they see Morgan as a person, but they can't place him in either category, and it keeps coming up even in the gang. So Charles, what are you? And he says, but I'm just a man like you. But what are you? Can you explain? And I just found his like the backstories of the background stories of many of the characters are so interesting. Actually, a lot of the stories where you write and you hear their background stories is why I bought the game and I didn't buy GTA 5, because I love these background stories. They really immerse yourself in. You can really immerse yourself in these stories.
Also, just one particular mission where the whole dilemma about the Native Americans, where it's actually it's one of the early missions. You have gone through it, but where they're basically hunting, but they actually discover a lot of animals was just being slaughtered without using them for resource or
the bisons.
Yeah, the bisons, they're just being killed, and then they find out the people who killed them were actually contractors who were told to kill these bisons and then blame it on the Indians. So this is a very
and this was a deliberate ploy that was part of the extermination of Indians, right? To kill off buffaloes because that was their main source of food.
Exactly.
In 1887, about 500 buffalo left, right? It's amazing, and only about 100 of them in nature.
It's scary, but it's also you learn about these things from the game, and I found it very interesting when a game company, because not a lot of young people tend to read a book, and now I'm just
generalizing,
but I've been there, and I have friends who said, "Oh, what are books?" But it's interesting. Get new friends.
And it's not as if, I think, when I grew up, and I also played computer games when I was a teenager. I mean, I wasn't reading history books at that point, and even later on, unless like us, we're sort of specifically within American studies. What you sort of your knowledge of world history, including American history, is limited, and I think most of us pick it up from popular culture, like films and so on, and often it's a skewed version. So I think it's interesting that through these long dialogue scenes, they actually infuse not necessarily sort of actual history, but a sense of what lived history could be like for certain individuals, right, at this point in time.
Yeah.
Like Charles, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. And Lenny also.
Yeah, they're both very compelling characters. So let's just move on to some of the main characters in the game and try to talk about how they fit into the Western genre, and how they also at the same time go against the conventions of Western. So fittingly, let's just start with Arthur Morgan, who's the protagonist of the game. So one of the things I was really interested in the development of Arthur is the honor system, where compared to previous games, because a lot of these previous Rockstar games are usually just sandbox games where you can do whatever the hell you want to do and there are no repercussions for it. You can get 5-star police after you, and tanks and helicopters would go after you, and you could just shoot them without any repercussions as long as you could just hide somewhere and they just magically disappear. So, but in this game, they really highlighted that every action you take has either consequences or blessings. So, what is your take?
I was in a saloon on just when I got into, I think it was Valentine, and walking up the stairs, and there were people sitting at a table, and there was a bottle, and it said take bottle. It's like, okay, I'll try that. And as soon as I grabbed it, thief, and I have to flee. So yeah, there are immediate consequences for your actions, and I think it plays into this notion of this idea of freedom or liberty, and of course the open world fits into that, playing around with that theme. But again, this is 1899. Civilization is there, certainly when you reach those areas, and I think it's a way, compared to GTA, for instance, of removing the game slightly from sort of fantasy, complete fantasy, showing that your actions have consequences. Although you can still ride away and then sit it out. Then there's a bounty, but you can pay it off. So in a way, it's still easy to. I mean, if you can reach the post office where you pay off the bounty without getting shot, then
during a hunt, if you can sneak past them and then just pay the bounty, then they're off.
Obviously
not totally realistic, but
no. But it's still different from GTA, certainly.
I had a kind of a similar experience at the bar, with limited only time I played it at our producer's house, where I tried to go in and I wanted to go into a saloon to get drunk, but because the first time I was playing, so I don't exactly know the controls yet, and I was handing my gun to him, and he just said, "What are you doing? Why do you have your gun?" And I just completely panicked because I didn't know what happened, so I ran out of the saloon, and I couldn't find my horse, so I accidentally stole another person's horse and tried to ride away, and suddenly I had a bounty on me. So all these... it also kind of surprised me, because when you're thinking about Western, you're always thinking about, especially in the saloon, where people are drinking and getting up to a fight, in this myth and legends that have been about the manliness of the Western genre. But in this, it's basically you cannot just go into a bar and have your gun out as you want.
Yeah, I think there is still this notion of honor. I mean, you can get sort of points in the game, right? If you treat people nicely, I don't know what you would call it, but there is a grade. So you get these. They're not necessarily points, but it's just a scale that goes up or down. It
moves up and down.
Yeah. The more polite you are to people, and also and this is some of the things that's been written about. There's the the suffragette woman who's this YouTube guy who fed her to alligators and whatnot. And there's also there are clan members. And of course, if you actually kill them, you're sort of you are given.
You get a more positive honor.
Yeah.
Oh, I actually didn't kill them. I just watched.
Yeah, but I think that's interesting, because this is where we are into, similar to the movies, where you can grab a Western movie, pick one from the last century, and even though it takes place, as I said, in the 70s or 80s, whatnot, you can still get a feel of the time in which it was made. And so here's a game that pretends to be open, and you can do what you want, but it has consequences. But if you kill a clan member, you are awarded, right? And of course, 1899 out west.
I don't think so.
Not necessarily. I mean, that it wouldn't necessarily have been a good thing to kill a clan member, and. So this is, the game makers, their sort of contemporary views. This is an example of where that comes through, I think.
Yeah, I also think they got in a lot of trouble if if you were rewarded for actually be pro-slavery in the game. Because you see that with Arthur Morgan, because this was also one of the things I noticed about, because he's really against slavery. Hates it and hates everyone who still protects the right to slavery and everything, because there's also a side mission about it where I thought to myself, well, of course he hates slavery, because they probably wouldn't have gotten away with it if it was racist.
If he was low-key Ku Klux Klan member. Wouldn't get that good of a rap. But I also noticed that actually there's a lot of freedom for the black characters in the game. I sort of throughout our history classes, I read about these terrible lynching of black people and the struggle they had to go through even after they got the freedom from the Civil War. The freedom, I should say that it's
quotation marks.
In quotation marks, you could debate that.
Yeah, but we have talked about that in the previous episode.
Yeah, all of a sudden I saw this black man and a white woman walking down hand in hand through the Saint-Denis, and I thought, "Oh,
are you serious?"
Yeah,
in New Orleans.
In New Orleans, they went like in the lock of arms, and I thought, "Oh, I don't think that would be historical accurate." But I know that this is still a game, and they have to sort of you see the elements of their own. What they want to this game to depict in some kind of sense, but in some instances, I thought the lack of real representation of the time, where I was surprised to see the KKK, but I thought that is from that time, and you have to sort of see the good things with the bad. In these kind of situations, and you see Arthur Morgan as this good guy. He tries to be in some instances, but you also see the ugly side of this history. And I sort of, I wouldn't say missed, but I sort of didn't see it in some instances. There is one what you mentioned, the suffragettes episode. I don't know if this is a huge spoiler, and I won't go further into it because it's maybe farther down in the game. But there is a mission where you sort of ride a carriage with the suffragettes, and the main suffragette, the sort of leader of the group, sort of it doesn't end well for her. Later on in the game, it's not a huge spoiler. It's sort of side missions. If one wants to go through them, they can, but it's just that was sort of this ugly side that I sort of wanted people to know from this game, that it wasn't all fine and dandy.
That initial mission you mentioned when Arthur is the driver of this wagon taking the women to this demonstration or protest through this small town, you see all these men sort of getting out into the street. What the hell? Get out of here! Get back to the home, which was I think sort of a fairly accurate depiction of the struggle that suffragettes went through, and I think they could have included similar scenes where if you have a black person riding into town, for instance.
So
I just remember the scene from Django Unchained. I can't remember it. Django is right after the Civil War, but people were like awestruck when he rides into town on a horse, and I didn't see that amount of awestruck in Red Dead Redemption because they were like, what is that inward doing on a horse?
But that's also a reference to another movie. I'm pretty sure he made that to a comedy movie.
Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles from the 70s. Still one of the most highest grossing westerns. Where you have a black sheriff with Gucci saddlebags.
I started watching it like yesterday.
I recommend. I mean, some of the humor is obviously dated, but I mean, it's a smart film in terms of how it plays around with Western tropes, and Hollywood role and so on. Yeah.
So just to wrap up Arthur's character, his development.
Do we know his background, by the way?
Yeah,
where's he from?
You get snippets of it.
Yeah,
but it's a mystery.
As
I heard
as it should be.
I heard some people taking elements of his story told by other characters in the game, that he was not a good guy.
No.
Before we get to play him, we get to play him in his
redemption.
I was going to say the redemption part of the title is crucial. Then, yeah.
So his background is not very good. You can also hear that in his love interest, Mary. She tells about the time when they were together, and he was not accepted into their family because he was this kind of bad guy who went on and
he was a savage.
He was a savage, yeah. He wasn't civilized like they were.
He was fully into the cowboy ideology, and
but more the train robbing cowboy.
Not cows.
He justified his actions with the ideology.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. And that's why his character development is that much interesting, because as you progress through the game, he begins to ask questions about all the choices he made in his life, and if the cowboy ideology is justified in this particular world they're living in, where civilization is creeping up on them. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, I think we already talked about the fact that it's obvious that time is running out. And I think once that becomes the premise, 1899 and all that, it I think it adds a sense of sort of urgency to the gameplay, to your missions and so on. And maybe again, I don't know how it develops in the actual game, but as a player, it may I don't know, it may force you to sort of start considering some of these aspects about this type of life that's been mythologized and hailed, and then the actual sort of consequences of that type of life. To what extent it's a life you'd want to hail and memorialize, or an ideology, which is also what it is, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if sort of 12-year-olds, if they have those thoughts.
They just think, can I lasso this guy and ride off in the distance with him on my...
And with Redemption Online version, they just curse over your Xbox Live now.
Yeah, 12 years just yell over the... Yeah.
So
it's still gaming, It's for everyone. But moving on from Alpha Morgan, I think the interesting characters like Dutch Van der Linde is another very interesting character, because he is this, compared to Morgan, he is this
idealist
stuck in the past, and he can't seem to. They both understand that they can't function in this coming world, this civilizing world, but he can't see it immediately. He sort of breaks down in a sense. He becomes, I wouldn't say, he is, without spoiling anything, he's stuck in the past. Mm-hmm. He idealizes the past. You have to be this outlaw.
He's pretty much an idealist narcissist. Because he's also the main antagonist for those who played Red Dead Redemption 1, for those who don't know that. Mm-hmm. Because the protagonist is John Marston, who is Arthur's friend in Red Dead Redemption 2. And that makes an interesting character. That's why he's such an interesting character, because in Red Dead Redemption 1, you kind of wondered why, because one of the things you notice is he's not the typical villain that the government is trying to depict Dutch in Red Dead Redemption 1. Now you get a whole nother perspective on him from Red Dead Redemption 2, where they're not praising him, but they're not totally criticizing him either. He's this complex figure who's trying to maintain his role in Red Dead Redemption 2. So,
but you hadn't played the first one.
No.
It's the whole game is sort of a huge spoiler people who haven't played.
The first one have been out for years. So if you haven't played Van and you're playing with Dead Redemption 2, I will say you kind of.
But it is because the first one is after the second.
Yeah, I've read about the connections and so on. So, there are spoiler issues, obviously.
Yeah.
But I will say that again, this notion of the type of life that these men live and prefer to live, and the fact that time has run out, and the tensions that creates. I mean, we're back in the 1960s Western, which is also what this type of film emulates. It's not the classic 40s, 50s Westerns. It's the 60s. And I mentioned how the genre sort of changed. You had these all-male collectives. And some central films like The Wild Bunch and Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid, both from 69, both films end with the men choosing knowingly, deliberately, to go out in a blaze of glory. They've been cornered in different ways.
Yeah.
And instead of either, going to jail or sort of just giving up that old-fashioned way of life, well, let's have one last shootout together. So they choose to die together as these, men.
That's kind of one of the tropes about Western, because you told us about the movie High Noon before. He also not to spoil the movie, but he has struggles if he should face these bandits coming into town, because nobody in the town wants to help him.
Yeah.
So he's all alone in this, and he don't know if he should. Why he's the sheriff in the town, so he don't know if he should just leave the town and get away, or he should face them, knowing that he probably is going to die because he's outnumbered.
Yeah.
Well,
the big difference is the film begins with him being married.
Yeah.
Right. And he is. He hands in his sheriff badge because he's moving to a new town, and then he learns that this gang member that he put in jail
is coming back.
Is coming back to town, and his posse will be there with him, right? But so he has the marriage. His wife gives him an ultimatum: if you go back, I'll leave you, and that goes back to Cooper, to the Virginian, and so on. And of course, he takes up the fight. And lo and behold, the wife, who's a Quaker, by the way, pacifist by religion, Grace Kelly, chooses. Yeah. She takes up arms and shoots one of the bad guys and saves her husband's life. So she has to sacrifice her beliefs, her ideology of nonviolence, and acquiesce. And of course, she comes back to him, and then they ride off together as a married couple at the end.
But that's also a lot about this entire idea of masculinity. Is in this High Noon, where
certainly
you decide to basically give up your life to fight for what you believe in or for honor.
Yeah.
And again, I haven't played the game, but I think also a lot of the characters play with this entire notion of masculinity. Some of them are these tropes that you're talking about, and some of them have these other ideals and basically more nuanced or more contemporary view of how it might have happened in the West.
You can take a good example. What's her name? Is Sadie Adler.
Sadie Adler, yes.
In the Red Dead Redemption 2 is a female character. You rescue her in the mountains. Her husband just got butchered by these O'Driscoll gang, mm-hmm. and she becomes this hardened character who is sort of this Black Widow of the West. She becomes once again. No, I wouldn't spoil anything, but. She is this. She has to become this tough kind of person. I would say tough guy, but she is a woman to sort of survive this. One point she mentions these O'Driscolls created her. They made her a monster. Yeah. Yes. So even her descent into this cowboy life, she noticed that the cowboy is, or at least the picture of the cowboy in Red Dead Redemption is this sort of monster character, this outlaw bad guy in some sense.
And it's interesting because it's the traits of the typical cowboy development from the genre, but it's just a woman now in this game. It's just a woman,
yeah.
And I mean, there have been examples of that. In films of sort of playing with that trope. Jane Fonda and Cat Ballou in the late 60s. Sharon Stone was in The Quick and the Dead from the mid-90s with Russell Crowe and DiCaprio as a gunslinger. The most interesting one, I think, is from the same year as Eastwood's Unforgiven, which sort of is still seen as this, perhaps the best of these later film westerns. But it's a film called The Ballad of Little Joe, J.O., based on a true story of a woman who was thrown out of her family kicked her out because she'd slept with a man, and so she's sort of stuck on the prairie. And after she's attacked by all the men she meets, basically, she finally decides to cut her hair, and she cuts herself on the cheek to get this scar, and she lives the rest of her life as a man in order to make it not in a gang or anything, just as alone, because as a woman on your own, you were.
One of the interesting things about Sadie is her role in the camp of because obviously all the men in the camp, they want her to be Mr. Pearson, the butcher's assistant.
Yeah.
You know, bring him the meat and help him cook. And as Casper mentioned, she is over with that life because she has been tainted by the O'Driscolls, and on this typical Red Dead Redemption vengeful path to become a cowboy herself, and actually be useful in actually
later gameplay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
It is interesting because she sort of in the beginning where they kill her husband and she is locked in I believe it's the basement door. It's this character called Micah that finds her and starts going all crazy on her. But she knows that these O'Driscolls that killed her husband, if the Vandalin gang didn't come and kill them, they would have their way with her and probably kill her afterwards. Mm-hmm. She knows that her position as this typical female character in this world would not have survived if she didn't pick up this more tough-leaning character. But she knows that when she does that, she is doomed in the end. That is not a spoiler. She knows that her mind is doomed in the end.
We're back to this idea of the Western hero
exactly
being tainted, right?
Yeah,
by his violent past and violent way of life. Yeah.
This entire idea about redemption for cowboys or bad guys, where exactly does it come from? Is that also from Hollywood, or is that just something new phenomenon?
Well, this is sort of. I think we have to talk about the fact that the United States, as we know it, or as it was around the start of the 20th century, was a result of mass violence, of genocide. So the history of the United States is built on a fairly short period of extreme violence.
Yeah, it's a very bloody history.
And the historian Richard Slotkin has written this trilogy that's sort of the go-to called. The first book was called Regeneration Through Violence, and that's his sort of driving thesis. That then novelists and I mean he didn't come up with the notion. He just sort of named it and pointed it out. Hollywood certainly continued pushing that idea that all right. It's a savage world. I mean, ideas of manifest destiny play into this, right? That they underpin the America we have today, and it's if you think too much about it, it's deeply unsettling.
You also
so Hollywood certainly helped push the idea that by use of violence, something good comes out of that. I mean, it's necessary. In order to civilize.
I also think there's a lot of aspect you could argue about this religious aspect of America. They always and still to this day love this born again Christian idea where you are out in the fringe and you're basically a sinner, but you turn your way around and find Jesus, if you will, and do the good thing and
redeem yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that most Westerns really have no sympathy for religion. because religion is seen as this feminine sphere of forgiveness, and yada yada. Be kind to your neighbor. There's a scene in The Searchers, one of these famous John Wayne, John Ford collaborations, where John Wayne's character, his brother and his family, wife, kids, have been slaughtered by Indians, and so he leads this posse. They end up searching for 7 years for this niece who's been kidnapped, and so there's a minister there burying the rest of the family and giving his speech, and John Wayne's character shouts, "Put a name into it," and because he wants to get out there, right? So religion is this useless thing, it seems, to sort of the classical Western hero who acts, who is not sort of a spiritual animal, if you will.
But how come the idea of the American man being created through this frontier myth sort of relates to this American city on a hill Puritan idea? How can two so fundamental ideas about how an American character should be, how can they exist and in sort of the same history? It's mind-boggling that these ideas are so different from each other.
Well, the ideals, the sort of the city upon a hill ideals. If you go back to the early westerns, to Cooper, the literary ones, to the Virginian, there's always this romantic interest, and the hero is this noble character.
Yeah.
And it's only at the sort of the last minute, literally in the Virginian last pages, where if he doesn't take up arms, pick up his guns, he will be killed. His love interest will be killed. So it becomes this inevitable and thereby excusable way out. But until then, he's done all the right things. He's acted nobly and idealistically and so on. And it's only because that outside forces, who are these corrupt forces in the Virginian, it's a white villain who has not been able to master life in the wilderness, if you will. Many of these early westerns showed that the male characters that were hailed as heroes were ones who, when placed in the wilderness, had the physical strength to survive, but also the mental capacity, and also who kept these American ideals intact.
Yeah.
And the villains, the white villains, were those who were incapable of that, who somehow came to stand for the opposite of that: corruption and mindless violence.
It's this
abuse.
idea of idealism against pragmatism.
Yeah, and then that idealism that the Western hero encompassed, in many ways, was then sort of broken down from the 60s onwards. But by that point, I think what the revisionist Western or anti-Western or post-Western, what you have left is still that male character and his exceptional ability at killing people. That's the only sort of thing that's left. I won't say unchallenged, because it's often challenged, but in the end, he perseveres. So a film like Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, which I think is a great film in many ways, it's been hailed as this major revision because it sort of goes against violence, and it spends a lot of time showing the horrible consequences of living a violent life. But it ends with this mythic shootout where he goes in alone out of the rain, and he's sick and he's wounded, and he kills a whole saloon of bad guys, right? And then rides off. So that particular myth it seems impossible to kill off. You can let in women and people of color and question all sorts of things, but we're left with the violent man. Yes, it may ruin him, but it's still depicted in this mythic way, I think, often.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting because I don't think that if it was a female lead you played as, it was but people would be very receptive for it, because we will say it is not historical accurate. But this is the entire idea with Western is basically built on this myth that probably didn't exist in the real life. So a lot of these things come from, as you're talking about, the literature and Hollywood, about this male going against all the odds. It is not historical accurate because the time was probably a pretty shitty time to live, and I don't believe there was a lot of people just riding into the desert and just doing their own thing and keep on going.
Yeah, and again, we talk about cowboys all the time, of course, and there are very few actual cowboys in the game, right? Yeah. And the cowboy, being a cowboy, it was a profession, it was a job, and it was extremely hard. And sort of the ordinary Americans didn't like cowboys because once they got to a town, they hadn't had a bath for a month maybe, and they wanted whiskey, women, and a bath. And so they were often seen as sort of antisocial scum. And it really wasn't until after 1890, the frontiers closed, according to, officially closed by the U.S. Census Bureau. Turner writes his thesis. You begin to see this in sort of instant nostalgia for the good old days, last year. And then these writers of, we haven't even talked about dime novels. They were also, I talked about Cooper and in the 1820s and 30s and 40s, and then I talked about Owen Wister in 1902. But in between, we have dime novels. Hundreds and hundreds of dime novels. They cost a dime, and they tell these adventurous stories, colorful stories. Buffalo Bill is often a main character. Over more than 550 dime novels starring Buffalo Bill, who is an actual person, who becomes this entrepreneur who sells his own myth in real time. Always a story about sort of violent confrontation with Indians and an adventure, right? So we should get that in there also. And I've almost forgotten the question that brought me here about the sort of this lone man. So after this type of life is over, we get this nostalgia, and the cowboy begins appearing in dime novels as this ideal figure because he was out there in this vast landscape with nature. He was not this gunslinger. He became that sort of slowly in these novels. The Virginian, one of them, right?
Yeah. But
it's not his call. He was sort of pushed into those situations, and then slowly, it just becomes sort of this mysterious stranger who rides out of the hills or the mountains, and right. So there is this progression.
I also don't believe that any of the characters in Red Dead Redemption are referred to as cowboys at any point. They're referred to as gunslingers.
Yeah.
Or outlaws.
Or outlaws.
Yeah, exactly.
Because one of the things where they talk about they're always pushed into violence is John Marston in Red Dead Redemption 1. He's actually a farmer at this point, giving up the life.
Yeah.
But because the government wants to make him do the dirty job, he has to go back to violence. So
sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But the cultural influence of Western, which is, I would argue, a strictly American culture, basically, because that's one of the people often say that America doesn't have a cultural history because it's such a country that haven't existed in that many years, and it came from all sorts of different countries in Europe and slaves from Africa and so on. But it has really been persuasive in American culture and society because if you look at also politicians, they like to get this masculine cowboy image,
especially in the South.
Yeah, especially
always
in the South.
having the cowboy hats and the belt buckles and
well, you can start with certainly Teddy Roosevelt, who lived the strenuous life, as he called it, right? His 7-volume autobiography, The Winning at the West. He went out there and he lived that adventurous life. And then you can JFK even, he didn't wear Stetson hats, but when he gave his acceptance speech in 1960 at the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles, if you go back and read that speech, he talks about, we're here, you can't get further west, and he pays tribute to the pioneers who risked their lives going west, winning the land, and then, of course, he sort of brings that into contemporary politics the West is one, but not really, because now it's the not the red Indians, but the communists, right?
Yeah.
That's the new threat.
Yeah.
And his frontier, his slogan, election slogan, the new frontier, right? So that the potent power of this mythology has been tapped by politicians from day one. Obviously Reagan, but before that you had Lyndon B. Johnson with his his white Stetson hat and his particular mode of sort of enforcing, the Johnson
extremely aggressive.
Yeah. Reagan obviously bought a ranch in California when he went into local politics and played on his, even though he'd only starred in a few westerns, that was sort of he used that a lot.
Yeah.
Even Clinton, for God's sake, who seemed the opposite of all this conservative, old-fashioned, black and white westerns. Before the re-election campaign, some surveys had found that a lot of Americans found it problematic that he spent his summer vacations at Martha's Vineyard, this sort of elitist place, right? So he spent a summer vacation in Wyoming.
Yeah.
And he had pictures taken of him on horseback with a Stetson hat, right? So a recognition of the potential power of images like that. And then, of course, after he was reelected, he spent the rest of his summers back at Martha's Vineyard.
You can also talk about other cultural influence, like the Marlboro Man with smoking cigarettes, with cowboy idea, smoking real men smoke Marlboro. So it is a big...
Marlboro was, it was a filter cigarette, which was marketed at women because it's milder. So they had this mild cigarette. Women was the main demographic. Thank you. And they were trying to rebrand it, and so they came up with the Marlboro Man, who was initially different types of men, mostly sort of doing physical work. But the one that immediately sort of stuck was the sort of rugged cowboy type. Who's then sort of, there are examples of certainly in Vietnam trying to, politicians and also journalists trying to explain the war using frontier rhetoric. Same in Iraq. So it's
interesting how
it sticks.
It has influenced, and even though we talk about this being mainly myths, the cowboy actually being gunslingers and outlaws and have nothing to do with cowboys at all. This idea of the cowboy being romanticized, and even though film starts, they start to depict this neo-cowboy frontier myth, this idea that it wasn't all that gun-blazing glory and riding off to the sunset with a woman around you and all that. We still can't stop thinking of this cowboy as being this gunslinger and romanticized depiction, and even as we talked about, politicians use it as influence, and people sort of attach to it. Then they relate to it and say, "Oh, that is the American man, right there, no matter what." And is this sort of what America can let go of? Is this the American myth? Could you say the one thing that this idea of the frontier, just going forth
into the unknown? Yeah,
I wouldn't say that is there an end to this myth, because it is.
Well, also, obviously the Western as a genre declined heavily from the 60s and onwards, and now whenever you have a Western, it's usually a director who has grown up loving Westerns and I get to make one. It's like, okay, I can check that off the list. You don't have the genre in any way influential, but what happens once the Western starts to, for several reasons, we talked about sort of the vast cultural, political, social changes in the 60s, but we also have competing genres. Science fiction comes in, Star Trek in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. We get Star Wars. We get the sort of urban crime thriller, Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the type of male hero simply moves into these genres. The sort of Western male hero, the notion of regeneration through violence is part of Die Hard, which also the first one references, Westerns, John Wayne and all that. So violence as a solution to potentially complex problems is still all around us in popular culture, certainly in film and gameplay. Myths, a myth is history simplified to the extreme, right? So all the complexities and unanswered and questions are simply sort of left out or trampled over, and a myth is this fairly simple story that explains history. And I think perhaps it's human to veer towards that because it's easy to understand. It rather than trying to get caught up in this morass of what history actually is and even if you go to experts, they don't necessarily agree, right? So I think it's human, and you can look at religion also, where you have myths that explain things in a fairly simple way. I think that's hard to get around. Be it the Western myth or myths from other countries that people live in.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to end it. Question your myths. Don't just take them for granted, but I could completely agree with what you're saying. So we would like to thank you, Thomas, for being in our podcast.
Thank you.
And for people who don't know what you should give your loved one in a birthday present, you can buy them Cowboy Nation.
At Christmas.
Cowboy Nation, for Christmas
is coming up. Yeah.
If you, especially if you know somebody who's obsessed with Red Dead Redemption 2 at the moment, that would be an ideal gift.
Yeah, we know Black Friday is over, but Christmas is still around the corner, so.
We would just like to thank you very much for being here. It was.
And is there any ending remarks you want to conclude on it? What is your rating on Red Dead Redemption?
Yeah.
From this point on, you haven't played it all.
What's
the way
the
through.
scale?
10. Yeah. I mean.
Okay, 1 to 10.
Most.
Okay.
Gaming.
I think so far 8.
Yeah.
Sometimes it annoys me that I feel sort of locked into place with some of the missions, right?
Yeah.
But I mean that I am no expert in gaming at all, and don't do it a lot. But I've enjoyed this game a lot so far.
Yes.
Ending remarks
From anyone?
from anyone? Our producer.
Well, no. I think we're done, and
hope to see you in another episode if you are
Be happy to.
interesting.